it's valuable. Now, there's no social media aspect. There's no algorithm. There's no feeds. So
and it's not a replacement for that relationship in real life. Like,
right.
It's a bridge, I feel like, to get to that person. But I would much rather be able to, that relationship is deepened when we are able to be together. Because I think the ones that have survived only on those things have, just in my own experience, like, they're not as rich as they were when we used to have more regular day-to-day interaction. And if that's the only time we're talking, those ones have maybe not gotten, they're not as deep as they used to be.
Yeah. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast. My name is Nathan.
I'm Anna.
And this podcast is dedicated to helping families love God and use tech. Today, our conversation is going to revolve around this idea of having friends in a digital world, and specifically around this idea that we've had brought up through talks or just through friends, where people are saying, well, my child needs to be involved in X technology because that's where their friends are, or that's where their belonging is. And so we have to give them this, even if we don't like it, even if we see that it may not be positive for them. We have to do this because this is where the friends are. And so we have to do it. So we want to kind of address that in love, because there is absolutely a point to be made there. But really look at the bigger picture and go, okay, what are we actually saying when we address this? And what can we do about that? How can we today address our 6-year-old, 10-year-old, 15-year-old when they come with these very real world concerns that we have other context for? And we go, yeah, but we have other concerns other than just your friend's son or daughter. Like, how do we address that? And how do we do so lovingly out of the hope that we have in the gospel? So with no further ado, let's get this conversation started. Welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast, a resource for parents who are feeling outpaced and overwhelmed as they raise children in a tech world. As an educator, parent, and tech user, I want to equip parents with the tools, resources, and confidence they need to raise kids who love God and use tech. Thank you to everyone who has helped make this podcast possible. Thank you if you have listened to another podcast, if you have shared this with a friend, or if you've gone online and you've subscribed or rated. Thank you for doing that. It is a huge blessing to us, and it helps other people find this resource. I was just checking this morning. 9 out of 10 listeners do come from the United States, but guess what? 10% of you are not within the United States, and that's really cool because that means that people have either told their friends outside the U.S. or the interwebs have done their magic, and people have found this because you're liking and rating and sharing and telling other people. So thanks for being a part of it. It's really exciting to see that grow and to see more families be served. All right, today's conversation, Anna, it was really inspired by a friend who came to us, but it echoes a conversation we've heard a lot of different times, which is, hey, should my child have this technology? We weren't planning on giving it to them. So it could be a smartphone. In this case, it was, I think, a social media app. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So a social media app, or we've run into families with video games, right? This is, and or I ran into a family with SoundCloud, like the music streaming service where people like upload their indie songs and like try to get recognized. And like, hey, this is where my kids' friends are. This is where their community is. And therefore, if I'm not allowing them to go to this place, they're going to just be left out in the cold. And that's a real concern, right? Like, as parents, we want to see our kids belong. We want to see them be loved. And I guess, I mean, as we kind of talk this out, and we're listeners, we're actively processing this as well because we have young kiddos. We don't have all the answers. There's certainly some research guiding this. But for many of us, we're having kids who are using cutting edge technology. Like, the research on what your kid is using with TikTok, or I mentioned SoundCloud, or the video games they're playing, like, that research isn't going to be out for 5 to 10 years. Not research that's really like vetted. So bear with us on this. But I guess, Anna, I would love to hear your thoughts on what is valuable about digital communication when it comes to like belonging and having friends. Like, is there any upside, or is this something we should just write out carte blanche?
Yeah, I guess it's a big question, and I think it changes a little bit. I don't know if that's accurate, but for me, it feels like it changes a little bit based on how old your kids are and our kids are. I think for our kids, we're still pretty little. And I still feel like we're really working on verbal communication at home. Like we're working on making eye contact and asking questions and just good conversation etiquette. And obviously they are working on written communication in school, and at home they practice that. Like our older son likes to journal and working on those written skills. But I feel like this is still such a little ripe age for cultivating those skills. And we've both said that that is very important. I think just in our own upbringing and regardless of personality type, because we are very different personalities, our kids are very different personalities, I still want them to be confident to walk into a room and be able to introduce themselves and carry on a conversation and feel comfortable doing it, even if they don't like to do it. Like we have one who will probably really enjoy that. Yes. And we have another one that's going to be painful, but I don't want him to feel like he can't do it. So I guess for us, it feels a little bit like we're still working on those things, and it will be a lot easier probably for that one to communicate digitally than it would be for him to communicate verbally. So if that is going to be the easier option, I want to work on the things that are a little stickier still.
Because there's still value in them then. Like
in the digital or
in the non-digital. Like
yes.
Because he could go communicate digitally and like write his thoughts out.
He doesn't even know that is an option, but
he would.
And I think he would really probably gravitate toward that. And I feel like I'm not ready to manage that situation yet.
Yeah. Yeah,
or to let him just default to that.
I love what you said there because you brought up this point that like it's compared to what, right? Like there absolutely is value because you use digital mediums, right? I use digital mediums when communicating with our friends.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's effective for replacing face-to-face conversation, though.
Yeah.
And that's what I feel like is a little bit of a rub, especially as kids get older. Our kids get older. If you have teenagers in your home, like, and your teen might feel differently. And I feel like there is a gap. Like I know there's a digital gap of like we're kind of in that middle generation of like 1 foot in digital nomad, 1 foot digital native, and can kind of remember life before tech was everywhere. And I know like the teens right now don't remember that at all. So I'm sure if we were talking to high school kids right now, there would be pushback on that. But I think it's so important for them to be able to communicate face to face.
Yeah, and to kind of illustrate this actually just occurred to me while you were talking. When I use this idea of like this is valuable, but compared to what? We went to a conference maybe 2 weeks ago, and it was this Christian Camp Association, and they came from one of these camps, came to me and said, "Hey, we are doing our staff training. We would love some content to talk to our kids about healthy relationships and healthy social etiquette." And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." We were talking, and it quickly became apparent he wasn't talking about his campers. He was talking about his staff. Because
they're probably all 20-somethings.
Yeah, they're all 20-somethings. So he's hiring all of these college grad or upper-level college students who are 20 to 23, 24, and he's like, they don't know how to be healthful with their tech, and so now we're sending them out to these 13 to 16-year-olds who are incredibly unhealthy and are having, these withdrawals, and he's like, we're actually having to implement some technology into our camp, not because we think it's excessively valuable for our young people, but because we don't have the time to deal with the psychological issues that are coming up.
It's like you need a week to detox.
It's like you
go to camp for
exactly.
a week.
And he said that's what they're having to do with just their camp leaders. So they're like, we're bringing them in early, and we need this detox. So I actually gave them the small group framework, and I was like, maybe this would help. Like it'll walk you through it, and like give them at least words to acknowledge as 20-somethings. Like this is what I'm processing.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And I guess to bring that home is that's not demonizing technology. It's recognizing this is absolutely a new medium. There's this new form of communication. There is a new normal growing, and we need to acknowledge that and recognize there are many positive things. The gospel is being spread through many of these mediums. And yet, I would compare it, if we think in terms of nutrition, someone would say, well, is a potato good for you? And the question would have to be asked in response, compared to what? Like compared to Laffy Taffy, yes, a potato's amazing for you, right? Compared to a bowl full other green and micronutritious full, well, that's not nutritious full.
I'm really going for it.
Micronutrient full. Oh, nutrient full vegetables, like, say, a bunch of Brussels sprouts, broccoli, and meat would be better than a potato. But potato is much better than a bag of Doritos. So I think that idea, as we talk about this and as you're processing this with your young people in your own family, your own life, the question isn't just, is social media all good or all bad? Are video games all good or all bad? There is this nuance of, well, what are we comparing it to? And if you go and read the research, that's the question you need to ask as well. I'll put that footnote here. You're going to find research like video games are good for you. Read the research, then go read the study. Because 95% of the time, what I've found is they compare it to being locked in a room by yourself. And they're like, these video games improve the reading levels of these kids. And then you go read, and the kid's like, well, the study group was also like isolated on their own, like suffering severe neglect, like 10 hours a day by themselves versus they get to play a video game or watch a show, and like, weird, their verbal skills improve. Like, well, yes, like, absolutely. So this digital tech can be valuable, and I want you to hear that, and that is true. And I love that point you brought up with that idea of like, it might even change based on 6, 8, 15 years old, which brings us to the next question of, all right, how do we know if it's valuable for my kid? And I guess we could take this in a lot of different directions, but like, how are we processing that conversation? Because like you mentioned, our kiddos don't really know it's there, but we have friends who do, and it's going to come quick.
Yeah, it's coming for us. I feel like this goes back to just establishing a tech framework for your family, and doing that sooner than later. I think a lot of families that we've talked to feel like, oh, wait, our kids are high schoolers, older teens. Like, how do we reel it back in conversations?
Yeah.
And I feel like, well, some of these decisions have to be made maybe even before your kids are old enough to be doing any of these tech options. Like, just, I think we say that a lot, but just having the end in mind of what's our goal for our kids long term, and working our way back from there. What was your question? How do we decide?
Yeah, how do we then determine if there is some benefit, and a kid comes and says, or like, I think your answer is exactly right. Before your kid comes to you, make sure you have an answer in mind.
I guess it's similar to like, well, what are we going to say about drinking? And what are we going to say about driving a car? And what are we going to say about having sex? Like, those are all conversations we're going to have, we know are coming, right?
Or pornography.
Like we know we're going to have those conversations with our kids at some point. And tech, I think, needs to be that conversation too, where we as parents are ready for that conversation. We're preemptively having that conversation before we think we need to have it, the same as you would with any of those conversations, so that we have our answers and we're equipped to walk through that with our kids, not just in the name of being right, but in the name of like, well, this is our hope for you. This is what the Bible says. And here's how we see that playing out. And as you earn trust and you get older, we'll talk about what that looks like to earn some more freedom in those areas. Our default in our house is less is better. So the less exposure and the less we can have you on it, and the later we can delay any sort of entertainment tech. That is our default in our home. So I know people are kind of all over the map on that. That's just kind of where we have landed.
Yeah, and if you guys want, I mean, let's just talk that out a little bit. The reason we're defaulting to less is multifaceted, but it really comes down to there's no evidence that a child not being exposed to this technology early is at any kind of a disadvantage. All of this technology is so vetted for usability that, as we have seen with our smartphones and our 2-year-old, she can grab our phone and she knows how to swipe and tap and find the music app, right? Like, if she can find it and it's unlocked,
if
like
she can steal our phone fast enough, she can get it.
She can do it, and we know that. So usability, that's a myth. We need to get that out of the window. But this other piece on it is most of these apps are designed for engagement. And we want young developing minds to be enthralled with the world they're in and enthralled with the things God made us for. And while digital tech can often emulate that, it's often also aiming to subvert our normal motivations and replace those with its program, because that's how they make money. So those are kind of two of the main reasons that we are saying, hey, we're going to default to less. And because, as we mentioned previously, sometimes the really fun stuff in life takes work. Real relationships often take work, and sometimes apps try to make them seem more fun and exciting, but really they're making you more isolated. So
yeah, well, I think there's a lot that can go into that. I think just the little bit, it's really easy to just pop in and out of relationships also when you're online. And even if that's, like a messenger thing or social media or gaming, like it's all me based. When I feel like being in this relationship, then I pop in. And if you're annoying or a burden to me, or I don't like what you said, then I can exit the relationship, which that is not how we see Christ-centered relationships taking place in the Bible. We're called to stick it out and to be long-suffering and to endure with one another, especially when we have chosen to be in friendship or relationship with people.
Yeah.
And then also I think the anonymity,
Yeah.
the anonymity that comes sometimes from being behind a screen, even if it is just somebody you're texting, like it's a lot easier to ghost somebody or to say something mean than on a screen than it would be in real life. And I feel like for us, like I want to teach our kids to work through those messy conversations. Like those are hard. It's hard to be in a fight with your friend. It's hard to have confrontation. I already feel like that's hard for our generation. Like people don't want to engage in conflict, even little conflict. Like, well, I just want to text it or I'm just not going to respond. So
for people who won't take calls.
I feel that like as a grown up and as somebody who's kind of learned how to do that a little bit. It's still really hard. So I feel like if we're going to let our kids default to that when they're little, like their communication skills and their reconciliation skills, which we're called to as Christians to be reconcilers, like that is really going to suffer. Those are things that we have to learn to do. Those are not natural, I would say.
And that's the reason we default to less, like trying to practice that. So in reviewing this idea of like, well, should my child have these social media or this video game or this digital outlet so they can have friends?
Yeah, I was going to say the linchpin is that this is where the friends are.
This is where the people are. So the first is we need to recognize there is value in that. You absolutely can have really cool relationships extending over digital means. And so I mean, you use Voxer as a voicemail extension to stay in contact with friends you already have.
Right. Yeah. Friends who live out of town.
Yep. And I use Marco Polo. And Marco Polo's a video version of that. Mm-hmm. And me and a couple buddies, we stayed in touch. One buddy was living in the Czech Republic and another one's out of state. And we've kept contact over years, maybe once a month, exchanging these video voicemails, basically. It's valuable. Now, there's no social media aspect. There's no algorithm. There's no feeds. So
and it's not a replacement for that relationship in real life.
Right.
It's a bridge, I feel like, to get to that person. But I would much rather be able to... that relationship is deepened when we are able to be together, because I think the ones that have survived only on those things have, just in my own experience, like they're not as rich as they were when we used to have more regular day-to-day interaction. And if that's the only time we're talking, those ones have maybe they're not as deep as they used to be.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that leads to the second point then of, all right, we do need to acknowledge there is value, because that's where I feel like a lot of parents get stuck on like, well, my kid showed me this singular point of value in this thing and I want to deny it. Tell me why they're wrong. And I can't. Like that, what your kid is bringing up, this fact that they feel connected or they have friends there, that is real value. And we need to acknowledge that as real value, because denying it, A, you're just going to lose that argument. And B, gives us a false view of what we're actually up against here if it is indeed unhealthy, because there can be good things in unhealthy things. So then we get to the second point of, and we did a very sweeping talk, so I want to kind of bring this in, that there's really two problems you can run into on the negative side of digital tech. Two problems with digital social relationships becoming our primary social relationship, I would say. So if your kid is saying, I have to be on this game, I have to be on this app, I have to be available to these people because these are my friends, this is where I find my belonging. Two problems with that. One is going to be this concept of disposable relationships, this idea that when things get hard, when things get tough, you can always just pick a new game, a new server, a new clan, a new group, that you can just disconnect from, because you don't actually have that friend group, you have a common interest. And now you can just go to a new common interest and it's as easy as tapping on a new app, right? So Anna mentioned ghosting. You can just walk away from a hard conversation. You never have to deal with it. So that's one.
Or a person who's just kind of annoying. Like there's annoying people in our lives.
And you have to prayerfully love them because Jesus loves them, right? And
right. And he loves you. And you're annoying probably sometimes too.
Turns out. So you can, yeah, absolutely. And then the other side of that, the flip side of a disposable relationship is this dependent relationship where I have young people who are now past high school, and they spend all day on Discord. So they'll go to their job and Discord, the app is open on their phone.
I think you probably could replace that Discord with...
Sure, with whatever.
With whatever.
But Discord's really unique because they've done an amazing job at making this app available across platforms. So when they go to their computer, that exact same group is on their computer now. And it's available directly through their video games, right? And it's just another screen that they've got open. But then when they walk away from their computer, it's now the exact same conversation that's going on their phone. And there's memes and GIFs and conversations and voice messages. And then when they go to bed, they literally leave it on the chat mode and they talk to one another with the lights off as they lay down in bed and as they're falling asleep. And so you go from disposable relationships to actually the exact opposite, which is dependent. Now I don't know how to be alone. And in my head, I get the image of Fahrenheit 451, of the family, right? Mm-hmm. I've got the shells in my ears, and I'm surrounded by these voices, so I'm never alone at all times. And that's also concerning because the dependency that comes from that is not what the Lord's calling us to. It's really cool to have friends that you're close to, but you can very quickly start to rely on those friends for more than just belonging, but actually for safety and well-being and whatnot. So I would argue those are two of the problems if this becomes our primary place to belong. If your child's like, I have to be here, which brings us back to the conversation. It's not about yay or nay, it's about why. Like, son or daughter, tell me, why is this so huge of a deal for you to be on? Let's talk that out and have the conversation of who else are you hanging out with? When are you seeing these people? What plans do you have to spend real world time with these individuals?
Yeah, I think those are the stickier ones for me. We've just had a few friends whose kids are a little bit older of like, well, the whole team is on this Messenger app. And so my son's not on the Messenger app, and then he gets to practice and he doesn't know the inside jokes and he's not part of that conversation. Or my daughter's missing out on when changes for band practice, or, hey, this thing is going on, and she's out of the loop because she doesn't have a phone or she doesn't have access to that app. So even if it's not like, okay, we've not given them the phone and we've really resisted and they don't have it, I feel like it seems like you get to a certain age and that's where communication starts to take place for kids instead of it. I mean, when we were little, it was like somebody would have to call your house. And right. I don't fault coaches or teachers, people who are having to communicate with a group of teenagers at one time to just send a blast. That's so great. Yeah. I can't imagine having to get on the phone and call 13 teenagers and be like, this is what time practice is. So that is wonderful. But if you're the kid who's not on that, I can see the rub of like, well, how do we get you to be a part of what's going on without that being something that's taking over your life?
Yeah.
How do we do that? And then it's a different conversation. Like we also have friends who are kind of in our little wheelhouse of age where their kids are wanting to be on social media or Messenger and TikTok. And do we push back? Like how long can we delay that?
Yeah, let's have that conversation real quick.
Okay.
Is that because I think the first part you brought up is like, what would you say to the family who's like, hey, our kid is missing out on sports. They're not part of the jokes. They're not really part of the team because this is where the team hangs out.
Yeah.
And it might be Messenger, it might be TikTok. Like,
we haven't had to do that yet from our own experience. So I just want to give that caveat of like, this is, I feel like I can anticipate somebody like, you're not living it. Like, and you're right. We haven't had to live that yet because our kids aren't that old. I think both of the friends that have older kids that we are pretty close to who are doing a really good job, and we've gotten to see them parent, their solution has been to have that communication device on a parent's phone. Okay. And then and their kids are 13-ish, 12, 13. And so then the kid can participate on the basketball group chat or whatever it is and kind of see what the jokes are and without having to have his own device. Yeah. And I don't think the kid is thrilled with that solution, but it seems to have maintained the integrity for the parents of this is what we have established as a priority for our family and for your tech health and tech safety. And this is a way to kind of bridge that gap. So you're still going to be a part of this friend group who we like right. Especially on a team or band, it's like we've chosen for you to be a part of this group of kids. We like these kids. We like this coach or whatever the activity is. How can we kind of make a compromise here?
Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
No, you passed. That was the correct answer. No, we didn't have that written down. That was really just a question I had. And I love just your insights on that and the way you kind of process it, because that is my question that I constantly am processing. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in we chose this group of friends for you already. We've already cleared that. We have a tech framework. We already know what we stand for, and we know how to communicate about this is Drool Tech versus Tool Tech. We can talk through that. And I would then add just that layer of it also matters what the app is, right?
Yeah, because I was going to say these friends that we're who are a few steps ahead of us, their kids aren't on TikTok. These are happening on Messenger or on a WhatsApp, a communication device. As far as more of a messenger type situation, I feel like I would still hold firm to no, I'm sorry. Even if everybody's on TikTok, you're going to miss it. And maybe you can see it when your best friend comes over and she's going to show you on her phone and we're all kind of together watching that thing. Right. That could be a compromise that we could make for older teens. But I would hold strong to there is zero research and benefit to your kid being on that. And I feel like we have anecdotal evidence from teachers we know and people who work a lot with kids of just the suicide and depression and anxiety and the mental health aspects that are tied to those apps is just not worth the...
Yeah. On the anecdotal side, I'm doing a talk at a local high school on Monday, a pair of talks. And I was requested to come in by a teacher, and he said, hey, I was just having this conversation with kids. The teacher had been walking down the hall. He witnessed some students mocking another teacher. And he got to his class. He's like, hey, guys, I just watched this thing happen out there. What happens in someone's head that makes them think that this is okay to do? And he said both classes that he asked the question to, the unanimous answer was social media. It's so normal, mocking and satire and just that vibe of comedy.
We've dehumanized everyone. Yep. You're not a person on social media. You're just a thing.
It's fine. If you got hurt, as long as it was funny, it gets lots of views.
And you don't know who I am. There's no, I think it's real easy to pretend I get to set my integrity at the door and just say whatever garbage thing I want to say, and there are no consequences to it.
And then when you had 2 years away from people, and then that became your medium, they basically said, we understand this isn't good, and this was really cool to hear. So these are high schools. It's a public high school in our town, and he's both of these classes told me that the social media has so changed what they believe is, or what they have seen in their peers, because none of them said this is what they do, which is also interesting. But they're we can see what our friends do online and then how they act in real life, and their real life behavior is starting to mimic their online behavior. Whereas before we go, well, you might write that in an email, but you would never say that to someone's face. And these students are basically saying that's not so true anymore. We're starting to see behavior in our peers that we used to only see online.
Well, I mean, that lines up with Proverbs
and neuropsychology, right?
Right. You can't be two people. It's going to bleed over at some point.
At some point, you're going to make practice permanent, and you're going to become what you've been doing. So parents, what we would say then for that second one is certainly disposable relationships are worrisome. Certainly dependent relationships are concerning, but there's also value, and we need to walk through lovingly. You have to have a family framework set up for this discussion. If you don't know what we're talking about, go gospeltechworkshop.com, and we made one. And it's 2 hours. It comes with a PDF workbook, and we'll mail you a physical one. And you can walk through that all at once or in little 8 to 10 minute chunks. But it walks you through. So there's really two halves. There's the talk it out part where parents get the words to say, and the walk it out part where you actually do the hard work of making a framework with your family. And I admit that it's hard work. That's why we don't volunteer for this stuff, and that's why we had to make a course for it. But it's there. So if you feel like you need help with that. And that brings us to our third one of tech, this big question of, well, this is where their friends are. We need to make sure that we're framing that properly, because most of us, when we say, well, this is where my friends are, we acknowledge that that may be true, but that's not necessarily the best, right? That nutrition question. And if we know it's not the best, someone has to be the first real world friend again. Like, unless we're just writing off in-person relationships forever and saying, well, we see this is the trend, this is where people are going, so we're going all in and we're going to just have our friends online. Unless we're going to say that, not a lot of people are willing to say that. Then we have to say, all right, who's going to be the first kid back in the cul-de-sac? Who's going to be the first person to invite someone else over and have that relationship? And this is something we've witnessed.
Well, I think it's a family decision also, because I think I have one family in my head who's done this really well, but the family has made it, they are a missional outpost in their neighborhood, right? It's bigger than just, it's a bigger conversation than just, oh, I don't want you on this messenger app. Well, why? Because we're trying to be, we believe that God puts us in our neighborhoods and in our apartment buildings for a reason. We are here not just to like drive into our house and then lock the doors and never speak to anybody. We're here because God's called us to witness and love the people next to us. And if we're just constantly on tech, we lose that opportunity. So I think if we can, not that our kids are always going to like love that and want to be a part of that, but I think if that is from an early age, just part of the conversation of why are we doing what we're doing? Yeah. Why are we saving money here so we can spend money here? Or why are we blocking out time in our calendars so we have time for these other things? Because it's bigger than just us.
Yeah. Yeah. And we can fall into that in the tech side, be like, well, this is something I enjoy, but I guess I'm getting on a tangent. I'm not even going to pursue that path. I'll pull it back to simply saying, yes, we can be intentional about making space in our calendars, in our families, and modeling that as parents, that, hey, this is where we're investing our time because we've been prayerful about it. So it's not just, we're going to avoid tech at all costs, because I would argue I have witnessed, okay, I'll use an anecdote, no research on this, but I had a student who was not allowed any tech, but played 3 select sports. And this was the girl that was having panic attacks in the middle of class. And she would you'd watch her eyes just get really wide because her heart rate would bump up to 140 just sitting in an English class. And when I started asking her questions about that, I found out she was playing school soccer and select soccer and then going to select volleyball. And those 3 sports were happening in the same season. Right? I'm like, well, yeah, and you're taking an honors course load, and like, you're a hardworking kid, so you're not okay just getting D's. Like, you're also getting straight A's. And you're dying slowly as a 9th grader. Like, you need to take a nap, and we need to so it's not, I'm not going to say this is just something we do in social media. Like, that kid had no social media, and there were still heart issues going on. There were still identity issues going on. So when we talk about our kids, then I guess out of this one, I just want to keep in mind this idea that we want to be available. We want company to become a normal thing. I told Anna, I always forget the name of this comedian. What's his name?
Oh, Sebastian Maniscalco.
Thank you. Sebastian Maniscalco. By the way, we're going to reference him, but if you watch him, he swears a lot. So
he's not filthy, though.
No,
I was going to say, I feel like it can
He drops a lot of F-bombs.
Okay.
He drops a lot of F-bombs, which I don't know where you stand. You may now quit this podcast forever.
I'm so sorry. Sometimes I can tolerate an F-bomb for a well-written joke.
Yeah, sure.
Just true confessions.
True confessions of an English teacher. But he has this amazing piece. You can find it on YouTube where he is talking about how growing up, he remembered all the time, having this great food laid out, and he'd try to go eat it, and his mom going, "That's for
the Lorna Doone pound cake."
Yeah,
it was only for company.
Yes, it's that's for company. And he's like, my kids don't know what company are, and if a knock happens at the door, everyone hits the deck, and he tells him to get the sword from under the couch because you just assume
don't answer the door, like
you're facing a home invasion.
Whereas, when we were kids, it was like, oh, you might expect or be prepared for company, for somebody to just drop in, and that would have been something apparently that your mom was planning for and budgeted for and anticipated. And I feel like our grandmas did this. There's always a pie in the freezer. Always. There were always cookies. There's always coffee on, because you don't know when Al and Verlene are going to pop in and want a slice of pie. And you don't know. And you just want to be ready and be able to have somebody come in for a half an hour. It's not like you have to entertain or cook a whole dinner, just to be hospitable and to allow for that space in a lot of different ways in your home. Yeah,
and that's not the cultural norm, but when we think digitally, think about what digital technology can provide us. It can provide relationship. It can provide even romantic relationships. There are people that meet through the interwebs. It can provide adventure. It can provide escape. It can provide information and education, but it cannot provide food. It can get you some scent. You can eat by yourself, but there is something about eating with people and the value of that. So whether it's buy an extra Otter Pop and just have those in the freezer for your summer as this heads up, or cook a little bit extra and just be ready if that kid drops in or your children know they can invite someone over. That idea of when we say building this into our schedules, building it into our families, like be prepared for company because the Lord's called us to be prepared for company. We are to want that, and I think being ready for that. So
what's our main takeaway? We started out with
started out with the big question of friends in a digital space.
Okay.
And then in reviewing that, we said, all right, there is some value in those digital spaces. Don't write them off. Just like Messenger and Voxer and Marco Polo might be on one side, whereas algorithm-driven, feed-based profit companies
where you're the
product.
The product, yeah.
And your attention, your focus is TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook might be on the other. But there are valuable parts, and we can't write those off. But we do need to recognize dependence is one side of it, and disposable relationships are on the other side. And then we need to make intentional choices as a family based off decisions we've already made, off a plan we already have.
That's the framework conversation.
Framework conversation. And part of that plan needs to be planned for people being a part of your regular life. People in your neighborhood, people in your church, people.
Well, that's the bigger, I mean, not that we don't want you to do our framework, but the Fredericks have a great, just family mission.
Fierce Families.
Fierce Families has a great family vision or family mission statement worksheet you can get on their website, which I think would couple real nice with ours, Ryan.
You would almost,
if you're listening.
Right, if you're listening.
But I think they do kind of go hand in hand of well, if we know our big purpose as a family, how does our tech fit into that?
Yeah. It's almost like a seamless transition. Like it was meant to be.
Like it was meant to be.
So that is true. And so then the questions we have to end this, to help us make this from a big talk on tech theory to practical, is really evaluating how do we engage. So first question is this tech reasonable, right? Based on our family expectations, does it fit the time of life and the trust journey that we are on, right? So some of these don't make sense for our 6 and 8-year-old, but for a 12-year-old who's proven their faithfulness in real world, right, in little things consistently, is this the next step? Is a conversation your family needs to have and needs to pray over, because it could be. Maybe it is through the parent phone like you mentioned. Second question, is there a compromise to be made? So maybe your family said, hey, we're saying no to everything. We're defaulting to no. And your child has such a compelling situation that you go, hey, you know what? In this particular situation, we're going to do whatever it is, right? We're going to download the phone to the app. We're going to put this opportunity on a public computer. We're going to give you a dumb phone, like a Gab phone, which it doesn't send or receive pictures, doesn't have the internet, doesn't have apps, but you can communicate and be independent and take pictures. And we're going to allow you that baby step in this direction because we understand that this is important to you and we love you.
Yeah, so and they've earned that kind of freedom and trust.
And you've earned that freedom and trust. Thank you. That's an important part of the we love you. And because we love you, we're going to give you good things. And then the third point, which you want to talk third point, Thoreauvian economics.
Yes, I do want to talk about it.
I'll talk it out.
Well, it's just the idea of evaluating, everything comes with a cost. So this idea of there might be a benefit to it, but we need to evaluate all of the costs. I think the Thoreauvian principle is it's great for me to work more hours, but if I'm working more hours, right, there, at some point there becomes a consequence to it.
Everything has a cost.
Yeah. So trying to figure out I think in his essay, he's saying I'm going to work this many hours because this is what I need to live the life that I want. And to kind of just keep that in mind. And if he's working more hours than that, because then I want to have this really nice desk. Well, that desk now means that I have to maintain the desk and I got to polish it and I got to buy a chair for it and I got to buy a servant to stand next to it. All these things of well, it's not just this. The desk probably isn't a really great example, but you get the idea. The more things that you feel well, I want to be able to do X, Y, and Z, those things all come with a cost. And I think the same is true with our tech what's a really dumb tech? What's the thing we just bought in there? plays the round things.
Record
the
player?
record player.
Yeah, I'm glad that was done here.
The record player is a very low maintenance. It requires nothing from me.
Right.
Other than that, when I like to listen to music, I pop on the round thing and I make it play.
That's what
it.
they're called.
The vinyl. Right. Whereas other tech is more maintenance for me. Like my computer is going to break. It's going to cost a lot more money. I got to pay for Wi-Fi. I got to pay for a printer. I got to have all these things that now that means I have to make sure I'm working or we're getting enough
software updates.
Yes,
and
it's just a lot more. It's not just the price of the computer. It's the price of all these other things that go into making sure the computer is usable.
Yeah. How much time do we spend maintaining our convenience? Like, oh, I got this thing because my life is going to be convenient now.
It's going to be so much easier.
Like, is it?
Is it? Like, or even the car. I mean, you could have a whole... That was that Malcolm Gladwell line I just told you the other day. It was just like, man, he was just a razor on like the car. Like the car was invented originally. Sorry, this is a tangent. This was in the Bomber Mafia. The car was originally invented to make driving and getting somewhere for people more accessible and people would enjoy going for a drive. The consequence, and he says this in one line, he's so good, of the consequence of the car is, well, now we have sprawling suburbia. And people drive 2 hours both ways to get to their work. So it was once intended to be like, this is providing me freedom, has become a chain.
Yeah. Which so many of our friends and people that we know in this area
we live
have
in a
experienced.
suburb.
Because we live in a suburb of Seattle, basically. And we have people who are driving 2 hours each way to Seattle who now haven't done that for a year and a half and their jobs are calling them back. And they're like,
we
no.
can't ever do that again.
Like, I can't justify 4 hours a day in my car and working 8 to 10 hours a day.
So it's great to have the freedom of a car, but we've also, because of that, there are real consequences that have happened.
And that's Thoreauvian economics, and bringing that full circle to, I mean, the biblical basis of that would be 1 Corinthians 10:23. All things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. And that this idea that we have a higher standard. And that is why when we talk to our kids about, Mom and Dad, my friends are on this app. They're in this game. I have to be there in order to belong. We say, all right, son or daughter, like in terms of the gospel, we need to understand that our belonging is in Christ. And that's not to belittle your friendships, but that's to understand like those friends can't ever make you whole. So let's make sure that we're not on the dependent side of the conversation. And now that we have that, what's our family standard? What's our family default? What's our expectation in this season of life?
And what are you giving up when you say yes to
and
that?
What are we giving up? What are we gaining? Because there absolutely will be a gain. There's a felt need that this will be matching. Is it actually doing it? If you're saying, well, I want to have friends, it's possible those aren't really your friends, depending on how this is going. We've talked before, but right, there's a young man we knew who got on video games because he wanted to be with these friends because that's where his friends were. He played for a few weeks, and then when he started inviting his friends to come over or to go play other games with him, even online games, they're just like, no, like come back when you're ready to play this game, because this is all they did. So they weren't friends. They were just acquaintances of convenience, and they wanted him to fill out their squad, but they didn't actually like him, right? So we want to keep that in mind. But there are these cool opportunities. Those 3 questions, again, that we're going to ask this week is it reasonable for our time of life and the trust that we've built with our child? The second is, are there any compromises that we can make based on our tech framework? So we have our standard, but this fits within the realm of our expectations. We can be faithful with this. And the third would be, does it fit that 1 Corinthians 10:23, permissible and beneficial? Does it fit the Thoreauvian economics of our family, that this is a value add, that we're giving something up, we're going to lose something by adding this digital tech, but is the gain outweighing the loss? So I hope you guys were encouraged by this and that this helps kind of you process this future conversation, or maybe one you're actively going through with your young person. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us at Love God Use Tech on Facebook and Instagram. You can find me, Nathan, at gospeltech.net, and you can join us next week as we continue this conversation about how we can love God and use tech.